Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high must leave the court immediately.
1, 2, 3, 42.
Today's rule is Rule 37. Forgiveness is an inside job.
Hey, how was Kentucky?
Kentucky was quite the experience. I fell in love with their airport and all of the decorations, and the people were super nice. It was really interesting being able to go from like waking up in Kentucky and then having breakfast in Indiana. It was almost like I was home. But the weather was, I don't know. You go to 18-degree weather when you get off the plane, and when you come back home to 82-degree weather, your body's very confused. My daughter did get a win in Kentucky because we did go there for cheer, and yay, yeah.
Nice, congrats.
I know. She said that team is phenomenal. They did a great job this weekend. It was their first competition of the season, and hopefully they continue this way. And they were very gracious. And I'm really happy that she's a part of it. So
Very cool. We were in Philadelphia for a hockey tournament. And I know as a big hockey fan, Audrey, you like this. Our 9-year-old team won the championship in 11-round shootout. It was so tense for all the parents. Like, what? I was coaching a couple of kids. One kid was like, one girl who's great player. She was crying. She was so nervous. And then the other kid just turns to me and goes, "Coach, I'm going to piss myself. Don't put me out there." And then and we were by Valley Forge, National Historic Site, and we were going to go look. And then the one dad was like, "It's just a field. Like, they didn't have a battle there or anything. It's just, they just stopped there to rest." And we're like, "Oh, it's not that thrilling then." So,
yeah, it kind of deters from the history behind it.
Jen, what about you? How was your weekend?
It was good. I wasn't feeling that great, so it was kind of just taking out Christmas decorations, decorating, and we were just lazy. It was a nice lazy weekend. Sometimes you need those. You need those to just watch movies, veg out on the couch with the kids. It was cool.
Awesome. And you're set up for Christmas, and we're set up here. Audrey, you're doing 2 Christmases, right? Down in Florida and Connecticut.
So I wish I could actually take this out there and show you guys what I've done to this place. I went from, it's just a white house. I'm very kind of, if I didn't have so many kids, there would not be so much stuff. But because I do, I go over the top with everything. So it's insane out there.
Pretty sure people listening to our show know that you tend to go a little bit over the top with
I do.
pretty much everything. So
I do. And then, they're kids, they're babies, and the magic of Christmas and the holidays. So you want to make sure that they hold on to that as long as they can. So with 2 houses, you have 2
Christmases.
And we actually were changing up the plans this year. We've had a lot of dynamics in our family change, but that doesn't mean that, things have to suck. So.
Yeah, keep the magic of Christmas going. And speaking of magic, we have a magical guest today coming on the show.
I am so excited about this. Hi, Brenda. I'm Audrey. Welcome to Rule 42 and our Wacky Wednesdays, because something always happens on Wednesday.
Yeah, we can't wait to hear more about you. It's very nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you again for waking up early to do this. We're on completely different coast sides, so we're mentally and physically in totally different places right now.
Yes, I am still awakening.
And going into the holidays, I understand that your story comes from a place where like no one should ever have to experience something like this. But in line with that, your message goes in line with the holidays so well and the new year, because you are all about forgiveness and the power of forgiveness and how it can help you move forward. And no one should ever have to forgive what you went through. But the fact that you could find it in yourself to do that, it obviously it resonates with so many. Yes, because
Thank you.
there are such heady little things that we hold on to.
Yes, it's true. And that's why I continue to share my story, because I know that it inspires people to let go of things. And also to just say that for me, forgiveness is letting go of the burden of that anger and resentment that we hold inside ourselves. It's never condoning what someone has done ever, or even that the person has to be back in your life. I definitely teach, forgiveness and setting healthy boundaries. Um, did you want me to say what the story was?
Well, okay, so that's where I was going to get into. So I kind of roll with the person. Not everybody's comfortable with certain components of whatever their upbringing was. Now, your one-man show is My Brooklyn Hamlet.
Mhm.
So this is based on the story that happened to you, correct?
Yes.
So did this start in your childhood?
Well, so first of all, it's called My Brooklyn Hamlet because Shakespeare had in Shakespeare's Hamlet, that character had something similar happen to him. His father was murdered by his uncle, and then his uncle married his mother. And believe it or not, when what happened in my life happens, my father shot and killed my mother and then married her sister, my aunt. I didn't know anybody who went through anything that I did, because the truth is, because I've been performing my one-woman show around the world for years, most people who I've met who have come to the show are hiding. They're so filled with shame, so you don't know anybody. And I think one of the worst things is for people to feel like they're alone in what they've experienced. And so for me, I found solace knowing somewhere in history someone must have lived through something like I did, except that in Hamlet, everybody is killed and it's about revenge, and I didn't want to end that way. And so I started my journey on how can I let go of this anger and upset and shame and guilt and all this stuff. And that's where I found my way to forgiveness.
And how long did it take before you found that you needed to even address the fact that you hadn't forgiven and you were holding on to things that were toxic to you and didn't really matter to the people that put it there?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because I was an actress when this happened. I was already an adult, and I put my one woman show up as I started it as just something in acting class that was like, I'm going to tell my real story. It's a personal monologue. I'm not going to hide anymore. I have to tell it. I really didn't want to tell it, not knowing that it would have a life of its own and people would want to direct me and produce me. And so I put the show up the first time, not knowing anything about forgiveness or anything. I wasn't conscious. It was before I got a master's in spiritual psychology after I put my show up the first time, because I put it up. I knew how to act. People would laugh, people would cry. And then I would go home and be absolutely miserable to the point of not even wanting to live. And so there was someone actually in an acting class that was going to that master's in spiritual psychology, and she's like, check it out. And so when I took time off after that production of my show, I finished my degree, and I learned there that the unforgiveness and the anger and the rage and all this stuff was really hurting me. I didn't even know before that. And so I was able in that program to also really learn to love myself, learn, like, how do you forgive if you don't know a healthy boundary? I learned how to have a healthy boundary. Part of that was taking my dad to court for wrongful death after he got out of prison, and but from a place of self-honor versus revenge. So that program was a catalyst to my healing. In addition to my writing, like, that took me one place, and then to learn to forgive and forgive myself, I learned in that program. And that that program. I graduated like 6 years after my mom's death. So
Okay.
it took a good six years where I was struggling.
Now, that was another thing I was going to ask you. So your father shot your mom, and I know that he married her sister, but did he not go to prison?
Crazy, right? He went to prison for a 1.5 to 5 year sentence on involuntary manslaughter, because the gun I learned to shoot on when I was growing up. I grew up in Brooklyn, was not found. There were 8 hours after my mom was killed, before the police were called, and there was a cleanup. And so without the murder weapon, my brother actually is the one who agreed to the plea bargain of 1.5 to 5 years. Then my father got out in 2.5 years. And somewhere in that time, he married my aunt.
While he was in prison?
I think it was. It might have been. It was a year before he went to prison, and he had already moved in with my aunt. So the legal system is crazy. But my father had a lawyer in place, so he wasn't talking. Like he had a lot of things lined up. So, unfortunately, I mean, that was what part of my process was like, because I was very close with him too. Was like to stop believing his lies and look at the evidence. And so so he ended up going. So I don't know when how I found out when they got married. I think it was when he was in prison, was because someone did a news article on me, and they did the research and they found the marriage certificate, because my father did tell me, a lot of this is in my one woman show. My father did tell me he was getting married that first year before he went to prison. Was it then? I can't remember. I think it was then. He told me he was getting married, and I thought it was my aunt, and I was like, "Is it my aunt? Is it my aunt?" And because he was living with her at the time, and he was like, "No, nobody you know, nobody you know." So I mean, my father was just a pathological liar, and so, but I did go visit him in prison once because he was so in my brain. And when I went there, my aunt was there visiting him. So I was like, okay, that's kind of how I found out a lot of things. Yeah.
Wow.
Is that why he killed your mom? Was it to be with your aunt?
I don't think so, but there was another woman a year before.
Okay.
Yeah, my father, about 3 times he had left my mother for another woman. And the year before she was killed, he left my mother for another woman who actually had a mob. I mean, she was involved in the mob. My father had mob connections. There was a cleanup of gun. Like, there's a whole other part of this story. And, there was this thing between this woman and my mom, because my father went back to my mom. So there was probably mob involved with that. But I feel like, my brother, my other aunt, who I'm very close with, who I joke never gets into, conversations because she's the good aunt. But, we think it was a combination of things. My father had undiagnosed mental illness, for sure. Sociopath. Probably very successful. A lot of sociopaths are, probably because they don't care about anybody else with his business. Undiagnosed mental illness, guns were like the cool thing. He definitely had mob friends. And in New York, it's very hard to get a divorce, I think, without paying a lot of money and stuff like that. And I really think money had something to do with it as well. So it was like, in some ways, a perfect storm, when you put that all together.
You didn't have to share anything once.
Yeah. And money was, money was something, because actually the week that she was killed, they were going to go to the lawyers, talk about divorce, so he would have had to pay her some money. But they were married for 30 years. So
I have friends that say, because you see like a dynamic in the relationship just isn't really what it should be or what people would consider healthy. And when you ask, they say it's cheaper to keep her.
It's what?
Yeah, to keep her.
I know there's a lot of people that stay for so many bad reasons. Then you throw in, especially if you look at generational, like people who have no, like, my mom did do a lot of inner work, but they had such a, unhealthy dynamic, love, hate, passionate. Neither of them really had the skills. Like, from my perspective now, with all the work that I've done, I could see that, neither of them took responsibility. They probably blame each other for things that weren't working in their life. And, money was a thing. Yeah.
No, definitely. Money's always usually a thing.
People aren't always who they say they are when it, and their true feelings and true persona comes out sometimes.
Yeah.
This is so interesting though, and it's sad to have to go through. I know that I got really big into the crime stories on TikTok lately.
Oh, okay.
So was there anything that you saw growing up that you were like, oh, maybe this isn't, maybe there's something? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. I know people say that. They say that with serial killers too. Ooh, but that was a nice person. But when you're in it, you don't believe that's going to happen. But there was, there was a lot of emotional kind of warfare in my house. And only after the fact. There was a lot of gaslighting on my father's part. And the dynamic was there was not physical hitting and violence like that, but there was a threat of a gun. Like, my mother left one time when I was around 15, and I didn't know what was going on. And here's the thing. My father was the type that was, like, jokey and funny, and everything was high vibe, and my mother was the one who was, like, more unstable and more, like, angry and stuff like that. So in some weird ways, I would side with my father because I didn't wanna feel that energy that I would take on from my mother, not really seeing the whole picture at all. So those are the things that I looked out at afterwards, and in my own process, my own 3-step forgiveness process, like forgiving myself for that. Like, I was a kid. I didn't know any better. But, like, one time she left, and I'll still remember this because I was very, very close with both my parents. And I came home from school or something, or work, and she was frantically trying to get out of the house. She was a stay-at-home mom, like, leaving, and I'm like, "Where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going?" So I'm like an annoying teenager, and she wouldn't tell me, and she screamed, "I hate you." And my mother never did that. That was so out of character. We were very loving and friendly, and left. And that's when I found out that when she came back, and then there was one of the times that there was gonna be a divorce or something like that, I found she said that he put a gun to her head. And I thought, if she came back, she must be lying, because why would you come back if someone did that? So that's where domestic violence, like, impacts everybody, and we're all a part of it. So one of the things I had to forgive my mother for was, the role model she set for me of how it's okay to be mistreated by someone who says they love you. But so there were signs, and, toward the last few years, there was just a lot of anger and tension between them and stuff like that. And my father, I talk about mental illness, 'cause he was definitely undiagnosed, but he's almost splinter in character, and, say things like, "Oh, that person's gonna get it." And, like, a third person, yeah. But this was like, this is my father and this is my mother. I know this isn't right, but, I didn't understand the psychology of it, or even the splintered personalities. Like, I understand how he was treated by my grandmother, and, like, I understand what.
He had a backstory too. So that's something that we've discussed with the people that have been on our show.
Yeah.
They don't always have a backstory. There isn't always some kind of bad upbringing for the individual.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wonder if they just don't know.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Because so many people are in denial. I'll tell you, when I even talked to my father, when he was alive, he's not alive anymore. And I was doing a paper actually for my master's degree in spiritual psychology, and we were looking at family history and patterns. And I remember my grandmother, and I'd asked about her, and he's like, "Oh, she was the most wonderful woman." And I'm like, "That's insane." So I just wonder. I really question that. I understand you interviewed people, but I'm just like, I don't.
Even for myself, like, I have a very unusual background in terms of how I grew up and, like, what's happened in my life. But I had a great grandfather that, if you spoke to his children, he was awful. If you spoke to his grandchildren, he was meh. If you spoke to his great grandchildren, he was the most fucking incredible person in the world. He was soft and loving and just was so funny and would get so happy when he would see you. And the same goes for my own biological father, who did not fully raise me. When I was a kid, I was daddy's girl, but to my brothers, he was fucking awful. To my mother, he was very abusive, physically, mentally, emotionally.
But did you see that?
Yes, I saw it.
So he was wonderful to you, but he was awful to your mother and your brothers. I'm saying there's an impact there. There's something there, even though people are multi-layered, for sure.
But they're different people to different persons in their life. Because to my children, they have met him, they have been around him, and he is a completely different person.
Like, nice.
Yes. Nice, and lets you play with his stuff. I mean, we were the kids that somebody got a system for Christmas one year, and we were allowed to watch him play. We weren't allowed to play. We were allowed to watch him play. And he's not that person anymore. So within that, like, to everyone, people are different. My past relationships, the person that they are to me and the person that they are to their children, are completely different.
I totally agree. I mean, actually, most people would say, and I've done my show where I have, because my father had a very big business, where I've had people in the audience who used to shop at the store, and they'd see what happened and be like, oh my God, although they did know he was a little crazy, but nobody would expect that. And he was very kind to like my cousins and everybody else, but my mother and him had this thing. So yeah, I mean, they're multi-layered. I mean, part of the reason I do my show is my one woman show, and my speaking is my show especially is because I show the different sides. Like, he loved me. I was daddy's little girl, but then he was beating, my brother.
Well, I think you mentioned earlier, Brenda, you said the word sociopath. And I mean, he fits the definition. Charming, fun, multiple personalities, can work the crowd when he needs to. And it's different things to different people. And like Audrey, you mentioned too, so this person is charming to you and nice to you and loving, but then they're this way to somebody else. And that's it. It just sounds like a classic sociopath.
Yeah, and they have to be like that, because that's what draws people. That's what draws people in, right? If you're just awful, you're not going to have your crowd of admirers and the life that you want. So they have everybody who has those kind of tendencies that I know has another side where they're awesome. I mean, that would be where someone else would be like, I never saw anything. But I feel like if you look at, like, even if the person is nice to you, if you see how they've been with other people, it's like, yeah, it's like you want to accept people for how they are, and also understand that they're not just the one note of what you see either way, right? Because here's the thing, knowing how my grandmother was with my father, what is so good about that is it gives me an in to have compassion for my father, even though he took so much from me.
Brenda, do you have kids?
I do. I have one son.
So you'll see if they did sports, you'll see like the person who you talk to, and Audrey and Jen, you know this too, they're nice and they're fun, they're funny, and then they kick them off and they berate the kid like a lunatic. And it's the same kind of thing. It's just, fortunately, there's no murder involved, but unfortunately for you. But yeah, people are, we have we have different shades of our personality. All
multi-layered. And then if you're not aware and you don't look at what you do, and I'd say if it's the Pareto principle, is it 80-20 rule, that 20% of the world is probably conscious and 80% is not, so they don't even reflect back whether or not they're a sociopath. They don't reflect back on how that affects people, that different way of acting and stuff.
And I think it's very interesting that you keep on saying that he had an undiagnosed mental illness. It goes in line with that time. Because people now say, oh my God, where did all of these mental illnesses suddenly come from? They didn't suddenly come from anywhere. It's just that nobody gave a shit. Sociopathic behavior was simply accepted as, oh, well, that's just how that person is.
Right. That's really important.
Or any other type of depression was, oh my God, they're so pathetic. They're always sad.
Right.
Like, it just wasn't something that was acknowledged. And it's
same thing with incest, and it's the reason why I believe it needs to come out. What, there's all this incest now? No, it's always been there. It's just that people have, been shamed about it, and, keep the secrets. Like, because I'm a storytelling coach, I've heard so many stories, and still people are like, well, I don't want to say anything about grandpa because, that would hurt him and he's changing. It's like, but this is your story. This is your life. Like, when do you take your power back and say, but this is my story? And I also teach people not to vilify anyone.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, but how did it affect you? Like, with your relationships growing up, how did seeing the dynamic between your parents impact your relationships?
I made a lot of crappy choices for boyfriends early on. Like, if they were kind of Guido types and alpha like my dad, not emotionally available. Although I did have some really nice boyfriends early on too. But I feel like because my mother was so loving, and both of them were very loving. I say this thing, it's like, because I'm a coach too, that there are people who haven't had murder in their family, but they didn't have the loving I got. when I was growing up. So I had like something instilled in me, whether or not, I didn't know my father was a sociopath. I didn't know that he could only love when he's getting something back or being seen a certain way. So during those formative years, I felt very loved. So because of that, I also had, some really nice relationships. In my 20s, I met one guy who was abusive. So I had one boyfriend who was abusive, and I feel like it was because I had such low self-esteem. I had witnessed my mother being put down for so long, and in the beginning, he really put me up on a pedestal. And if if you're not filled up yourself, you don't know how amazing you are, then you're going to feel validated. And so that quickly degraded, and luckily I was able to get out of that relationship after 3 months. But I have had pretty loving relationships after I was engaged to a really nice man when my mother was killed. I broke up with him a couple of years later because I felt so unlovable, and I feel like I didn't want to be witnessed in my pain. Really, I mean, that's what it came down to. And then after, I had a wall up for many years, like nobody, one red flag and you are out. And then I was able to really open my heart. Going back to school for that master's really helped me. And, learning to set healthy boundaries and learning to be like, well, what do I want? I want to be instead of looking for someone to complete me, I started looking at the qualities I loved in myself. And then I said, oh yeah, I want to be with someone who's really funny. I want to be with someone who wants to awaken and things like that. So, and right now I'm engaged to a wonderful man. I was married for 13 years too. So,
That's amazing. I love that you were able to find what it is that you need, because a lot of people start to forget that we are important as individuals, and we tend to prioritize everyone else over our own needs.
Right. But so it's so easy. I will say there were a couple of people in there who had sociopathic tendencies and narcissism. There definitely were. And then I would have this awakening moment of like, oh my God, I have recreated some things from my family.
I have an awful, awful ability to control jealousy. I was treated like a princess and everybody else was treated like crap. So for me, if a man loved me, that meant that I was the only person that he was treating
Yeah.
well, and that everyone else just didn't matter. So when they would engage with other people, for me, it was like, oh, well, you can't love me and love her. So you got to choose.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I had that happen is I would, if I was upset, this is years ago. I mean, I'm with my fiance 4 years when we're not married yet. And actually the marriage was to a woman, which I'm going to say this. I will say this. I was probably bisexual, but I will say this. The years after my mom died, I was always dating men. I love men, but I had that, like, I will just cut you out if and I feel like, and I don't want to say it in any way that makes it like I didn't fall in love with her, and that I wasn't already bisexual, because I'm sure I was. But I do know that when there were red flags with her, it was like, well, she's a woman, so it's okay. And so I allowed myself to be open and in love. And I do think that contributed, So, yeah. But of course, out of all the people I've been with, the only person who cheated on me was a woman. So now I'm off women.
That's correct. I actually dated girls too when I was younger, and I remember one of the best feelings that I got was I felt like a lot of guys just kind of didn't care if you were there. Like, you were there, you weren't there. It was kind of like if other people were there, then they were more engaged in them, and like, and I went out to dinner with her, and she was in med school. So there were a couple of other med students there, and she started talking to them because they were sitting at the table next to us, and we were there together. So it wasn't like we were at a group. So I'm just kind of like sitting there like, What they were talking about was school related. So I understood. And the minute, it was like the second the thought crossed my mind that what purpose am I even serving here right now? She could have just came to dinner with them. She was still engaged and reached out and rubbed my leg and then just turns around and goes, hold on, turns around and goes, babe, are you okay?
I do think men can do that, but yeah.
It was mind boggling because the fact that she acknowledged that there was a shift in my energy
Yeah.
made me feel like, oh my God, this is so fine. There's nothing wrong with this. Like, I'm good. And it immediately shifted. And I started playing with, they had brought their dog. We lived in Georgia. So, animals go everywhere. So I started playing with their dog and they were still engaged in their conversation. And that feeling just completely went away.
Right.
But it's interesting to know that the only person that ever cheated on you was turned up.
Oh, I know. But here's the funny thing too. Here's another funny thing about that. No, because talk about the difference between men and women. Like, usually, I mean, there's so many YouTube skits about this and stuff. Usually, the woman wants to talk and get deep and everything like that, and the man is like, "Huh, what's the weather like?" Like simple, right? I mean, I know it's a generality. But it is, what's funny is that, yes, my ex and I had lots of really deep, rich conversations, but I became more the masculine one that was like, I don't want to talk about this. Or like, it's an interesting balancing of my energy and a marrying of my masculine and my feminine. Anyway.
I feel like you flip-flop, like when you're with another woman, like, you guys could both kind of go masculine or female depending on when you need to.
Yeah, I think so. And I learned a lot about like what we just assume, like someone's going to open the door or someone's going to go to the store. A lot of really amazing things men just normally do. I just want to say that, even though it's also generality. I thought it was really great because also my ex like embodied more of her feminine when we were together too, So, yeah. I mean, I'm friends with the most important relationships I've had in my life. I'm still friends with them. And of course, my ex-wife, we adopted our son. So my son was in the foster system. And I met him. I signed up for a mentoring program. So I met him when he was 10. And then it was designed so that you mentor this foster child for a year and then you can end, right? So they're not like losing someone else. But we ended up adopting him. And now he's 25 and a welder.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. And I love that because you also have like the stories that are out there where people think that they can adopt and then they feel like they can't love that child as if it were their own. So it definitely makes
crazy.
Blows my heart when I love, whether they're mine or someone else's. I love kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Love. It doesn't matter if you're blood.
Exactly. And Jesse never had a mom because he was raised just for a few years by his father, who was a drug addict, gang member, like all this stuff probably scared the woman who gave birth to him. So it really, for Jesse and I, it was really beautiful because I really wanted to have a child and he wanted a mom. He got two.
And you were able to show him the love that you experienced growing up.
Yes. We used to say I was softy mom and she was sporty mom. So I was like, I remember he, when I was mentoring him at first, I would bring him back to the foster family. And I remember one day, like, I was like, where's my hug? And he hugged me. And then his foster mom was like, you don't ever hug me. I want a hug. So it's really, I feel like I've done some good things in my life.
That is an amazing thing. You're shaping someone to be a better person.
Yeah. I mean, then they become adults and then, you hope that you've instilled something really great in them. And now he's 25. Those teenage years, woof.
The teenage years are hard. They're hard but I think everything that you teach them is in there. And they see you and they see how you act and they see what you give them and like the love that you instill in them. And
yeah, it really is about the love. I just saw him recently. He lives on the East Coast and we just have that bond, Yeah.
That's amazing. That is really great. I have 2 stepsons, so I totally get not being your own, but like that you still love them so much, like they are your own.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is all about love when it's a child.
And the fact that you did anything, Brenda, after what happened to you, all of this is positive. You know, you could be in some home somewhere, you know, losing your mind, but you didn't, and
Drinking.
or drinking or drugs, and you're doing these wonderful things, and you're helping people. And do you want to like talk about your business a little bit? Because I know your main goal is to help people. So
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I actually was a coach focusing on forgiveness from like 2007 to 2014 and setting healthy boundaries, helping people create rituals and things like that. And then in 2014, I started teaching storytelling because I had a successful one-person show I've done all over the world. And I would have people tracking me down, like other performers and actors, and be like, how did you do that? And then I started teaching entrepreneurs how to tell impactful stories because, and also how to be on video comfortably because, and how to make an impact because I would go to all these coaching meetings and people would be terrified of video. And then they didn't know how to tell a story that really landed and made a difference and how to connect like on this level. So I've directed over 200 people for the stage and for interviews. I feel like my message is about forgiveness, but I want to help people with their message. So because I'm so vocal with my story, I find out the real stuff, like what's really going on in families and people with suicides and, you know, horrible abuse. And all the people that are my ideal clients are always about healing and helping. And how do you tell an impactful story that also fits your business? So that's what I do. I hold a class called Healing Through Story. Tell yours. I'm probably going to start a new one in the new year. And I work one-on-one with clients to develop keynote speeches and one-person shows, which are kind of interchangeable so that they can use all of themselves and express themselves and also know how much humor or emotion to put into their pieces so they're not turning off their audience. You know?
Now, is this solely a California-based business, or is this something that you do through?
No, it's global, and thank God it was global before the pandemic, so it wasn't that much of a transition for me. Although it was back then, it was on Skype, which I'm so much happier with Zoom. So yeah, no, I used to see clients when I lived in San Diego. I'm in LA right now. Before the pandemic, but everything's been virtual. So I'll do classes, I sell coaching programs, and like right now, because of the nature of the world with the politics and everything else, I do have a forgiveness program called You Are Phoenix Rising, Unbreakable Spirit. And so I'm running that right now in a closed container where I pretty much channeled 30 forgiveness lessons. And I've usually sell it do it yourself, but I decided to hold a container for people so that they can work on forgiving themselves, setting healthy boundaries, self-honoring, making self-honoring choices, forgiving their mother, forgiving their father, and forgiving God. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I have my one-person show, which I really, in 2025, want to get back on the road with it.
Because you took a break.
Well, the pandemic took a break. I was touring before the pandemic, and actually a second show that was called Divas in Danger, which was a 35-minute version of my one-woman show with two other women. It was about escape, betrayal, and budget plastic surgery. So then we took a break, and then during the pandemic, I was hired by a couple of theaters in LA and San Diego to perform my show virtually, and also for some fundraisers and things like that. And then I did my show in Santa Monica last year, but I've been so focused on other people's stories, but I'm feeling the desire to get back on the road again.
Well, your story is very important to get out there, especially where you ended up and where you ended up finding yourself and how you've been able to help so many people. And it's funny, it's interesting to know that there's so many different dynamics because you help people that are in the military. You've been able but do you have to adjust based off of like your
What? Yes. Well, I've been coaching since 2007. So my coaching is very, very personal. So if I'm coaching with clients, I'm meeting clients where they are as far as also how much inner work they've done. I have a capacity to hold for the emotion because I believe the healing happens in the emotion. And when I remember when I was first getting therapy, after my mom died, a lot of therapists aren't comfortable with the emotion. So they access people out of that healing back into their head. So I'm comfortable with that. So, and then as far as speaking, I adjust not my show, but if I'm giving a talk, I'll adjust something in it just to address what the audience is dealing with at the time, because I've also spoken for domestic violence coalitions and things like that. I'm going to talk to them about different things or different examples or different stories than I would for the military, although domestic violence happens everywhere, or so it's pretty much the same story, because also how I teach storytelling is there's the circumstances, but the reason people resonate is because of the humanity within it. So who has not dealt with betrayal, loss, grief, and the potential for healing, So it's like honing in on with each client, what's that message underneath it? So you don't really have to change the story.
I used to speak for victim impact panels because I was in a car accident where my one best friend died in the car accident.
Mary,
thank you, but it was really hard sharing my story in front of like rooms of like, there was like hundreds of people sometimes where I'd be talking, and I remember one of the people there said, they were like, I know you couldn't finish your story because you started crying, but he was like, I feel like that made it even better. And I remember looking at him like, what? But he was like, because it made it feel real, and it made it like people could see how much that affected you and how like it's real. And it's not just read in the newspapers, like it can happen to you, and like to see it happen to someone. So
that's so beautiful. And that's the whole thing is like, then what I teach is so that you can do that, and then you step off, you really give to your audience, but then you step off stage and you do some inner child work, you like do some loving things so that then you don't get depressed after or not want to do it again.
Yeah, because it's hard. I stopped speaking for a while because it got hard.
And that's what I teach, because it happened to me too. And then I'm like, oh wait, there have to be. So for me, I stopped acting and speaking and went to a master's degree for 2 years. So what I do is I teach the healing in my process so that people have the tools to, I probably teach storytelling so I can help heal more people. Like they don't know that. To the healing tools in between, so that you can be that vulnerable, because otherwise the other thing is people aren't vulnerable at all, and then it's just information and it doesn't really impact people like it could.
A lot of people are concerned with judgment, being judged.
Yeah.
Judgment is such a big thing. And you brought that up in the beginning when you were saying, like, it's not that the stories weren't happening. It was just that the people weren't either recognizing their own individual part of the story and how it affected them, or they just didn't want to acknowledge it because it was just so taboo.
Right.
I also feel like it makes you feel bad too. Like, are they going to look at me differently now? Like people like someone in this room, and now are they going to go talk to someone that I know, and now everyone's going to look at me differently? Like I remember that's what used to kind of go through my head. Like
I was so terrified when I put my piece up on stage. It was 100-person top acting class in LA. I was so terrified of that judgment, but it was like an inner guidance, God, whatever, that was like, you need to tell your story. I literally just did like a 5-minute video on this thing about not letting judgment stop you, because it's just the ego's way of keeping you small. Like, who the hell cares? Why should I care if you judge me? I've been judged on the fact that I teach forgiveness. Like I was brought into Arizona to do my show to Scottsdale, and it turns out someone in the congregation, it was a Jewish community, actually their stepfather killed their mother. And without even knowing me or what I teach, they were pissed that I'm coming in and teaching about forgiveness. And I'm like, look, I teach my story. I don't tell anybody what they have to do. That's the power of how I share it. Like, this is my story. You can take it or leave it.
It's even in the title, Forgiving the Unforgivable. It's yes, we acknowledge it's not something that should ever happen, but that doesn't mean that you have to hold on.
But people come to it with their preconceived notions or what they've been taught by religion about forgiveness, which is like thinking it's condoning something, and it's not. So that's why, it's good to get the definition of it.
Brenda, was there a moment or moments when you were forgave yourself, your mom, and your dad? Like, was that a process, or that one was like a lightning strike? Like, okay, I'm good with this.
It's a process, and it's like peeling an onion, because, and I'm sure you guys have dealt with this. You think you've forgiven, and then I don't know, a year later, someone says something or does something, you're like, But then the problem is people then beat themselves up instead of using that as an opportunity to love yourself more, forgive yourself more. Right. So, let me think for a second at moments. Well, what I can tell you with my father, I consciously did a ritual. I took one of his hats that I had and went to the top of a mountain because I knew it was hurting me, this anger inside of me. I went to the top of a mountain. I said a prayer. I actually did it because I had an insight while I was writing poetry that if I hate a part of him, I hate a part of myself, and I'm no longer doing that to myself. And then I said a prayer of release and threw his hat over the mountainside, and that ritual really helps me. With my aunt, I had a harder time forgiving her, and because I did what I tell my clients not to do. Even if they're not in your life, if you haven't resolved it, it's going to come up and kick your ass in some other relationship or in some other way. And so she wasn't in my life, but when she died, my other aunts called me. I remember I was driving from LA to San Diego or back the other way. And she told me, "Oh, I just want to let you know that, Aunt Jeanette died." I was like, whatever. And you have to understand, I've taught forgiveness for a long time. I'm known as the queen of forgiveness in certain circles. And that is not a forgiving thing. So I got off the phone, and all of a sudden I'm driving. I start crying, and I see a vision of my mother come to me from the other side, and her arms are open and she's welcoming her sister to the other side. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I have been so angry at this woman for 18 years or whatever it was. And I need to let this go. Like, I know better. I know that I can't hold on to anger that I think my mother should have for her sister. So that actually was like, that happened and it was done. Right.
That's a big thing that people don't acknowledge too, that you hold on to things not based off of what it did to you, but because you felt like that other person should feel that way.
Right, exactly. Like, let them deal with it so that you don't have more stress on your body. And then, in the bigger picture, is there anything to forgive? And of course, that's a whole nother discussion. Is there or are things just as they are? We make things right and wrong. And you can know that from, like you were saying earlier, in a family, everybody has different ideas of what their experience was. So what's right, what's wrong if it's not one thing? So, yeah.
There's a reason people say walking a mile in someone's shoes. We all have different experiences that we've had that have gotten us where we are. One doesn't make one more valuable or less valuable than the other, but it doesn't mean that because you know someone that was murdered or because this person that you guys experienced things the same way. So it's just, it's interesting.
I feel like perspective too.
It's all perspective, right? Because haven't we all thought something was wrong, and then later on we're like, maybe that wasn't so wrong.
Yeah, the way you look at stuff it really does change. Like, and then sometimes when you look at it from another side, you're just like, wow, okay, it wasn't that bad, or
Right.
Way worse than I thought it was.
Right. And it's so easy to be in right and wrong. And especially, I think, because I've reflected on this, I feel like when you grow up in a kind of crazy family, like for me, I was like, that's wrong. They shouldn't be doing that. But it kept me sane when I was in that crazy household. But it wears out. When you're an adult, being in that righteousness just hurts you. Like, yes, you should have discernment. That's not for me. I don't think that's right, but not with the energy that comes with it.
Yeah, Brenda, it was great to talk to you. Can you let our listeners know where we can find you? Do you have an Instagram or?
I am on Instagram. It's Brenda Adelman. I'm mostly on Facebook. I have a free Facebook group called Unforgettable Speaker Society, and I run all kinds of trainings, put videos in there and stuff like that. And it's a mix of the healing and the storytelling and your marketing and storytelling on stage and all that.
And your book is where?
My book is on Amazon. It's called, I have a printed version, but it's Kindle. My father kills my mother and married my aunt, forgiving the unforgivable. And it's a part memoir and part my 3-step proven forgiveness process.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for our listeners that are going through something right now as they go into the holidays, what is a good step that they can take to start getting towards this level of forgiveness?
I actually think forgiveness is an inside job. You can only forgive other people to the level that you forgive yourself. So that's the good news because it's inside of you. So if you are really angry at someone, one of the great tools I learned was about projections. Like if you're upset with someone because you feel like they acted inappropriately in a situation, look at where you've acted inappropriately in a situation. Instead of using it as a chance to beat yourself up, forgive yourself, love yourself, like move past that, because it is like magic. When you heal that kind of stuff, then it doesn't show up around you and other people. So it would be like forgiveness is an inside job.
Love it. So look inside and forgive yourself going into the holidays. Thank you so much, Brenda, for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great talking to you and meeting you, and I really enjoyed hearing your story.
1, 2, 3, 42.
Rule 42 is hosted by Audrey Cruz and Jen Burke. It is produced and edited by Tom Smith. The opening song is Rule 42 by Eddie Carr. Rule 42's artwork was created by Aubrey Cruz. And I'm your announcer, Molly Smith. Thank you for listening to Rule 42. We hope you enjoyed the show. New episodes premiere every Thursday on all podcast platforms. Please subscribe, share the show, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple.